Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Road to Freedom podcast. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Matt.
And we're at number 18 of
Woo.
100. And once 100 is reached, then we're all done,
Yep.
I think. So we're on day, what day are we on from freedom from government? Number 5?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's tough out there. If you're listening to this, we have a safe haven. It's everywhere, and nothing is happening to you.
Yeah, my code name on the CB radio is Freedom Man.
Yeah, breaker. Come on. We're experiencing a government shutdown, which means our paychecks are fuller. Unfortunately, we can't visit the monuments or the national parks because those are barricaded up, although they had enough money to pay people to barricade stuff.
Luckily, they are large enough we can see them from a distance.
Yeah. Clearly, nothing is happening. This is all grandstanding. This is the federal government at work. It would be great to have even more shutdowns just to show people how little we need. At the very least, the giant flow down from the federal government way of intruding into our lives. It seems that everything is fine.
Yeah, and it could be just a coincidence, but government shutdown happened, gas prices dropped dramatically. Just saying.
Yeah.
So maybe if you guys want cheaper gas, we need to get rid of the government.
Yeah. But of course, then stock prices come down. But of course, that's just because the Federal Reserve has manipulated interest rates, and now people are realizing that cheap money is a little bit more expensive. So,
could you imagine if we got the Fed to stop messing with interest rates all the time?
Oh, it'd be a crash and then an immediate bounce back into what real prices are. You would go, oh, I have to pay $8 a gallon for milk. Oh, but I'm making 3 times as much as what I am.
Yeah.
And we're able to trade in different commodities and bring back the gold standard.
Oh, gold.
I mean, just think about it. Like money right now. Like think about what money is worth. Like, I know we haven't in this podcast gotten too much into the economics of it, which is a huge proponent of what libertarians talk about. But just think about like what is money worth? Like, why is money worth something?
It's only worth something because we allow it to be.
Yeah, and I mean like.
Well, really, it's because the Fed says so.
It's only because people have agreed that it's backed by, I don't know, the strength of government. So there's a theory, and I forget what it's called, but there's a theory that money is worth something because you have to pay taxes into it. So under the threat of force, money is worth the dollar is worth something because you have to pay taxes in that amount, and so that's where it derives its worth from. But if you go back to before Nixon, who got us off the gold standard, and then even before then, when we had the ability to own gold reserves, and you didn't have to turn it into the government. That's looking back from like the 1910s is where the dollar has derived value from, because that's what I mean. That's what money took its value, and like I should say dollar. The money is different. So the dollar gets its value as money because back in the day you had deposits of gold that you could go into a bank or some depository and say, here's a slip of paper that guarantees me X amount of gold. They hold it for you in trust. There's no fractional reserve, so there's no manipulating currency to say for every time you put in $10 worth of your money, they can borrow, was it like 110% worth of its value,
like
and create, when you and I create money out of nothing, it's a federal crime, but banks can do it based on the government allowing
we have
it to.
10,000 in our bank, but we'll loan you.
Yeah.
Here's $100,000. Just okay. Well, how are you going to pay me back?
Yeah. Which this is a tangent within a tangent, but in A Wonderful Life, George Bailey is a terrible person. Like he doesn't have enough money to cover a run on the banks, where Mr. Potter, he has the money in order to acquire it, and he can back up George Bailey's bank as well. So, really, not saying that George Bailey should kill himself, but he should at least get out of banking.
Oh yeah.
But looking back, so you have these slips of paper that you exchange for gold. Gold had value, has value. It's always had value, really, ever since we got out of the barter economy. And you said, "Hey, I have 100 eggs, and I want to exchange them for a cow." But then the person who has the cow doesn't want 100 eggs. They want, 20 sweaters. Well, then you have to go find someone who wants eggs for sweaters, or find this convoluted way of determining who gets what in order for you to get their main product. So the creation of a standard of money it isn't a result of government. The government's not like, oh, gold is worth something. Right. It's out of necessity.
I think we just hit a point where there's too many products to be that, like you said, like, right. Oh, well, all I've got is 100 eggs. Well, who wants 100 eggs?
Yeah.
Now I've got to go through this whole big long trading scheme just to get the cow I needed. So they were smart and said, hey, let's just have this one currency.
Right. So you have gold, which is limited in resource, which makes it valuable, and
it always keeps going up.
Yeah. And it's not just because it's limited, because that's the whole communistic labor theory of value, where, oh, I've put 1 million hours into this, so it's worth whatever price that I put on it because I put a bunch of hours into it.
Yeah.
Well, I could hammer nails into a board for 1 million hours. It doesn't make it any more valuable.
Well, it could be art, though.
It could be, if someone's willing to pay for it, but that's a different that's a different way of. And so then gold is valuable because it's able to be broken down easily, so you can divide it up easily enough. It's shiny, so it has qualities for things like jewelry, or computers used to have it a bunch. It's a good conductor of electricity, so you have a lot of good value from it, and it's kind of been a staple of civilizations for,
ages.
Yeah, it would be hard to go back and find a time period where someone didn't view gold as valuable. So gold has a lot of good qualities to it. And so then when you have the U.S. government saying, okay, you have to turn in your gold, we'll give you dollar value for it. And then Nixon afterwards takes us completely off the gold standard, so that the very fact that the dollar is worth what it is because we're able to convince people that it's worth something. That's been riding the coattails of the gold standard since 1970. So the dollar has not been wiped off the face of the planet for 50 years because there's this long line of, well, it was backed up by gold, and so it's kind of like that the piece of paper that rides on a heat trail. It's just barely putting along, and we know this too because you look at, we hear inflation, and that the dollar isn't worth as much as what it was, and so you type it in like, oh well, back in 1906 this plot of land was worth $10,000, and you plug it in and it's like
10 million
now. some outrageous cost. Or you realize that Rockefeller was the first billionaire, but he was actually worth a couple million, but by that standard.
Or when when Carnegie became the wealthiest man ever. I think no one else has amassed as much of a fortune as he has at one point. But you put it in, I think it got up into the trillion. There was at least hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
Way more than anybody right now.
Yeah.
But it was pretty darn close to trillions.
And so when you realize that the human nature has been able to increase the value in people's lives, like there's always this theory of like, okay, you bake a pie and then you can only cut it up so much, and so the 99% have 99 of it, and the rest of us are fighting over this 1% of the pie. You don't realize that it's like, okay, but somebody else has added something of worth, and so has added not just a single pie, but a method of creating pies for yourself. And it's not this division of pies, but creating pies on top of it. That's what the idea of the capitalistic system has done, where it's the opposite way. If you take a socialistic approach, and then you're saying, okay, well, capitalism has created $10 million worth of stuff, so it's our central planning that divides it up. And so that's why back in the day you had Noam Chomsky or Sean Penn being all positive for Venezuela, because they were able to do so much for the people. Well, eventually, as Margaret Thatcher said, you run out of other people's money, and then you have a big downturn where then you have to determine whether or not you're able to survive based on eating rabbits.
Yeah.
So that's what's kind of currently happening, is we're seeing volatility in the market because the market is being propped up by cheap money, because the Federal Reserve prints what it wants and then sets an interest rate that doesn't actually reflect what banks should or could or would want to set it. And so that signals to people that they have the ability to borrow money at an incorrect price. So sometimes we see like Apple would take on debt, but they would be cash positive. It's like, well, what's the point of that? Well, it costs them less money to borrow the money and pay it off in 10 or 8 years or whatever than it would be to spend money that they're gaining an interest on. Yeah. And so that's a crazy system to think about, but they're just doing good business practices with what the system has been put in place. And so we see the 2008 crisis has been a manipulation because of the Federal Reserve and the federal government encouraging essentially bad loans to people who couldn't afford it. And that program is just a smaller version of what the Federal Reserve does. And so back in 2008 and 2012, when Ron Paul ran somehow miraculously on End the Fed, that's the point of why you might hear libertarians say taxation is theft and End the Fed, because the Federal Reserve has been imbued by Congress into granting these rights where they're doing stuff that manipulates the market, but it manipulates it not by the free hand of the invisible hand, as Adam Smith calls it, but by this kind of whim based on what they think they can control to try and soften the boom and bust. And you would still have that system in place if you had a true free market, but they would be quick and they would be short. But the whole Great Depression was somehow almost immediately after the Federal Reserve is created, we have the Great Depression occur because of the value or the inclusion of cheap money in the 20s.
What I think is funny too is how people take their money that is no longer on the gold standard and invest it into gold as a good way to keep their money always growing for them. Mm-hmm. A good investment. It's kind of funny. It's like it's almost like a lot of people who invest in gold are taking their money out and putting it back on the gold standard and just sitting on it for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know where we were going with that, other than to say it's good that the government is shut down, because maybe there's one or two people that get convinced that we don't need this trickle-down power, as I like to call it. So other people try and poo-poo kind of Republican talking points as saying, oh, it's trickle-down economics. That never works. Well, it seems like power done from a centralized location that's high up on the food chain, where one senator has to listen to, depending on how you count it, 300 million people, or just 3 million people, depending on the location. Trickle down power is harder for the average person and for all the talking points that the left has about trying to empower the average person. That's the hardest thing to do is how does a senator listen to 300 million people or 30 million people?
Yeah.
You can't. You're talking to staff, and the staff is just writing down stuff of people calling and saying they're for or against this, and the senator may or may not listen to them. But, if you go to your township's, board of trustees, city commission, what have you, then you have an area where it's, depending on the size of your place, 2,000 to, whatever the size of a city is, then you have a greater voice in that. So
better representation at that point.
That's just percentages right there.
That's why we should start, another civil war, I guess, because unfair representation and taxation.
Yeah.
Because I'm not getting fair representation at the federal level.
Well, and, it's 34% of your money is taken away from you for programs that you didn't agree to.
And then I'm not allowed to use either at that point.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, well, you've made too much money to be on food stamps. But it's like, well, my tax dollars go towards that. Why can't I use it?
Or just any program that has started. When's the last time that you heard of a program that was started but then got shut down? You never hear that. Once a program started, it's impossible.
It just keeps going. Social Security is a perfect one. That wasn't meant to be long term, but yet we're at the point too where no one wants to get rid of it because the previous generation has paid into it.
Yeah.
And they want their money they paid into it, which is understandable to want the money you paid into it.
Sure.
Because
but there's no guarantee to it. That money that's coming out of your paycheck has already been spent. Yeah. Like there's no bank that you can go to that says, "Oh, let me look at what my account says."
It's not like, "Hey, Matt's put in, $8,000 into Social Security in his working life."
But there's a record of it. But there's no depository that you can go to.
There's no guarantee I can get that.
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone's saying is like people our age aren't going to be able to. By the time we retire, like Social Security might not even be a thing by then.
Right.
So I mean, if Social Security has to end at a certain point, I'm all right with it ending on mine. I hate that I paid into it for so long, but it can go away. Yeah,
as long as they stop taking it after it fails.
Yeah, it should fail in the next couple of years, and then I get to keep all that money.
But see, I mean that whole thing is essentially a Ponzi scheme because it was started by saying, oh, these poor old people, they didn't know that you were supposed to save. They didn't know that they were supposed to live and survive, and you really had kind of more of a breakup of community and family coming out of kind of the World War II era, where more and more people got pushed to own homes, and you had women going out into the work area. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the fact that the family unit kind of changed around that time. Like you didn't have so much your parents living with you. You had you didn't have to own land in order to vote. You didn't have to speak as a central authority figure for your family to go and cast for your vote. It had a dynamic change to it, and we think, the nuclear family is considered kind of the pinnacle of it, but the nuclear family is essentially that, a part of the nuclear age after the late 40s. So you just have a change in everything from that, and so it's nice for those old people, but when you continue the process down and down, you need more of the people at the base to prop up the people at the top, and like the baby boom generation, again, a boom of people, you need then that base of people to have more kids in order to pay on top of them. Plus, there's no conversation in any of this about should we increase the age when you can pull from it, because people are living longer now, and it's not through any great big advancement or anything like that. It's just we've gotten better at nutrition. We've gotten better at use of medicine and stuff like that. So those are kind of the bigger pushes. But you still have kind of the same median age that most people have. It's just whether or not you can stave off tragic circumstances where before you couldn't, and also childbirth has pushed those numbers up too on average. So without a generation like ours that can expand at the base, because we're told we're all killing the environment, and we're needing to curb our lifestyles and not have 2.5 kids, that it's selfish of us to have children, to get rid of children as well. You don't have a base there to prop up to pay into the system, and so like all Ponzi schemes, at some point it has to fail because you don't have as many people included into it.
Oh, yeah.
The only thing they can do is steal more of your money, which
they probably
is,
will.
I mean, it's possible, yeah, but at some point you're going to get to the breaking point. You're going to get the Laffer curve comes into effect.
The beautiful Laffer curve. The lower you make taxes, the more you actually get in tax revenue.
Yeah.
I'm even against taxes, but I would, I know the no taxes ever is a long way away.
Yeah.
If we can ever get there. But I mean, if people just listen to studies and what actually works, the fact that people like Bernie Sanders and people and a lot of people honestly think just the rich should have to pay a higher wage or a higher tax amount. No, the Laffer curve is a proven thing that because they have the money to skirt around those and find the loopholes or hide their money. So I've said it a million times. If you just make even the richest people, but make it for everybody, make the richest people pay 20%, 18%, something low, and they're going to pay all of their taxes instead of skirting around it or finding so many loopholes, because they're going to be like, oh, I was paying 40% before, but all of a sudden it's dropped down in half to 20. All right, cool. I can swing that. I'll pay my worth.
I think in 2012, Ron Paul was talking before CPAC for the conservative meetup, and he got a huge round of applause when he said, if you agree to having 10% of your money taken, but you don't pull anything from it, would you support that? And he got a huge round of applause. And I'm always about moving the football. Yes, I want to be radical in the sense that I want true freedom to be able to do what I want, as long as I'm not hurting or defrauding anybody from it, as you do with any interaction that you have on a daily life until you come into conflict with that. But if it takes that step down the stairs to get to that, if we're going in a downward trend to get to the bottom, hey, I'm all for having 10% of it stolen, and then we can look at it again and go, hey, remember when we said 10% was needed? Well, now that we got rid of all the stuff that doesn't work or hasn't worked, or you find that that the super rich politicians that were in there for 40, 45 years in office, that the incentivization isn't there anymore to hold that power. Hey, maybe that 10% can go away, and then we can look at states and counties and get down to a more local area, and then different types of government systems or living systems can spring up because of that. But so right now we're in good shape. Federal government's down, but sadly it's not out, and I have a feeling it would be great though is if the whole Trump derangement syndrome caused just the government to shut down for the next 2 years.
Unfortunately, though,
just no one. Yeah, I mean, how does so many people in power go? All right, at some point we're going to become irrelative, and we need to instill fear in people again, or else they'll think that we're not needed.
Yeah, the government, we'll maybe go the rest like another month tops, but they're going to crap out more money somewhere and be like, hey, guess what? We can turn the government back on because we found more money. Oh, where'd you find it? Oh, the Fed.
Found more money, aka allowed the debt limit to be raised.
Yeah, debt limit goes up to like skyrockets another $1 trillion.
Yeah. So this is the whole thing. Like I always joke around that taking the old adage saying from the occupied Occupy Wall Street group that was suddenly wiped off the face of the planet, and, like the anti-war left. We I was joking, say, this is what democracy looks like, and sadly, this is what democracy looks like. It gets you a system where the entire nation has taken on $21 trillion in debt, and you and me each contribute to $22,000 of that. If we paid $22,000, that's for every person in America. That's what we would need in order to owe it out.
And the debt clock keeps going up.
Yeah, because it's
almost
like interest
at
rate.
22 trillion.
Yeah,
almost. We'll get there soon.
John Stossel did a really good one when he had at his show, where he cut off all the zeros and said, this is a household income, and it's taking in, like $56,000. It's spending $84,000, and here's what it's having to borrow with an interest rate. Do you think that this is a healthy home? And people on the street would say, no, this is ridiculous. You go, yep, okay, but you add 16 more zeros on this, and this is what the entire nation has done. And that's what government issued bonds gets you. I mean, just the very fact that on the first year of them issuing bonds, that they have to then find more money the very next year in order to pay for those bonds, makes this country not as rich, and they have to find it elsewhere. And on top of that, we're paying for wars overseas. We're paying for other countries to be safe. We're toppling nations, and luckily we're finally getting out of Syria and hopefully Afghanistan, which someone tell me anymore. If we took a vote, how about this is what democracy looks like? Let's take a vote and say, for everyone who still wants to be in Syria, let's have a nationwide vote. Do you think we'd still be in Syria?
And then everyone who raised their hands has to then go to Syria.
Yes.
Because you want a war over there so bad, buckle up and go over.
And point to the map. We're going to take you in a dark room. A map is going to be lit. You point to where you think Syria is. And if you're on the same continent, I'll give it to you. I mean,
I feel
half
like
the people are going to be pointing to North America.
I mean, I feel like half the people would point like they just don't know where it's at.
Yeah,
people are bad at geography.
Well, geography, or just knowing exactly what's going on. Like we were talking about this, just how much. So like I mean, I don't want to get into it because I'm sure I'm going to miss something. But the very fact that you can trace Syria back from Obama to George W. Bush to Clinton to Bush Sr. to I mean, it was the fall of the Soviet Union where we had no enemy and we needed to create one. I mean, 2 years after the fall of the wall in Berlin, we attacked Saddam for nothing. He was like, "Hey, I want to invade Kuwait. Can I do it?" And they're like, "Yeah." Bush Sr. says that we have no qualms over what happens in Kuwait or the Middle East. And then all of a sudden, Desert Shield comes into effect, and then Desert Storm after that. So then you have an invading army, and then you just leave. So the whole premise of taking them out is just done away with.
It was an odd war.
Yeah, and then you have Clinton bombing just the Middle East. I don't think there was ever time in his administration where he wasn't launching Patriot missiles into at like $21 million a pop too. I mean,
the bombing is still going today through Clinton, Bush, Obama, and now Trump. Yeah, like bombing hasn't stopped since the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, you had the attacking of was it the Cole or the one of the ships that Bin Laden did.
Yeah, I forget which ship it is.
I mean, that was part of the run, and Al Qaeda was created by the United States. It was given money as a way. So we wanted to pull the Soviet Union into war with Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's back when they were the Mujahideen.
Yeah, and
we were given guns and training and everything. Weaponry for.
We propped up Bin Laden and we trained him and I'm talking the royal we as in American forces did.
Then fast forward to
9/11.
2000s.
I mean, 9/11. If you just listen to the reasons, not they hated us for our freedom, and they're a bunch of radical Muslims who have come in and they're like, America is the devil. Like, okay, yep, there are people that get radicalized and take that position, but what was the point of Bin Laden's attack? If you listen to his interviews, it was because we had military bases in Saudi Arabia that, they wanted us out of the Middle East because we were causing so many places to get bombed, and they couldn't just live their lives on their own. Not saying that what he did or didn't do was our fault, but the very fact that I agree that it should have been done, but the very fact that you have a stated reason being an overreaching from a foreign power, it would be the same thing as if China put bases in Mexico and had war games on the El Paso line. Yeah. Wouldn't we be a little hesitant too if China was doing that too?
China, we want you out of Mexico.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a reason that we almost started a nuclear exchange for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was just 90 miles south of Florida.
Soviets were in Cuba.
I mean, there's a reason. So then you have Bush, and then you have Bush take out Saddam, who had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks, but had
he's a pretty bad dude, but
no one's saying that these dictators. I mean, there's a reason they call them dictators, and we've never really liked them. Although it seems that we're okay with some of them now. But he was our ally during the 90s under Bush. I mean, there's that infamous video of Donald Rumsfeld and him shaking hands and being given pretty much chemical weapons that he used to attack the Kurds that everyone was so up in arms about. So then you had Iraq toppled over, which they were enemies with Iran. Then you had Iran get bolstered, and you had Syria and Libya, which then that was Obama's thing. Obama goes in and takes out Gaddafi, destabilizes that region, and then trains the rebels that go into Syria, which ended up being former Al-Qaeda members that then created ISIS. Mm-hmm. And so they take the weapons that they're given by the CIA to try and take over Syria from a rebellion. And there's no good guy in this one. It's like, oh well, either we like
back the lesser of the evils.
Yeah, I mean, but one of them is Al-Qaeda, and the other one's
they're both pretty bad.
Yeah, another bad dictator who at least though protects the Coptic Christians, and you're pretty safe to be a non-Muslim person in those areas. You didn't have beheadings of Christians up until you had ISIS form, and Obama was the one under the operation of the CIA that was like, oh well, we can control them. And guess what we didn't do? We didn't control them. Nope. They went back over to northern Iraq and pretty much take over the country again, which you had the needed surge to come into. And then, you have Trump with bombing the Syria for something that we're pretty sure hasn't happened. And there's no talk about that anymore. So getting out of there is a no-brainer, except for the very fact that people hate Trump and, you play identity politics. But where's, I remember not being a libertarian. I remember being a Bush supporter for his 8 years. And I remember watching 20, 30, 60,000 people marching in the streets for being anti-war to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere else. Silence for 8 years for Obama. And now you have, when Trump bombed Syria, that was the crazy awe of reporters who were like, oh, this is the most presidential thing he did, and those rockets were beautiful. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're talking about he's literally Hitler, but you want him to maintain wars. I don't understand that. You want him to have a standing army. No, you should want those people to come back home, and all those fun little, let's all turn around for the Star Spangled Banner, and there's the kid's dad, and he gets run up to him, and we all
Those
cry.
are heartwarming.
We don't want 6,000 people coming home and doing that. Like, we should want that. We should want out of Afghanistan too. I mean, even Afghanistan too. Like, we had the ability to go in and grab Bin Laden, but no, like Bush didn't want that to happen. He wanted, to stoke the war fire so that you can get the military-industrial complex to come in and sell you a bunch of Under Armour shirts that you don't need and that don't work in arid climates like Afghanistan. So that's what the state is. That's what top-down power gets you, and that's what is great under the shutdown. Unfortunately, when the government shuts down, it doesn't actually shut down, and you have non-essential personnel return home, and sadly no one ever thinks about the very fact that when they come back into work, that, well, if they were non-essential back then when it was shut down, why are they essential now?
Yeah, like we were fine when they were shut down.
Yeah. So
it's kind of funny. I was looking at this national debt calculator or clock that's I got up on my screen right now, and the national debt's like what 21.8 trillion, and then you look at this another number, and they try to put it in green to make it think like, hey, we're making money. Our GDP is 20.8, so that right there, like, our GDP is 20.8, but our debt is a trillion over that.
Yeah. Well, in GDP too, I may be wrong on this, but I don't think it takes into account like food or power.
Yeah.
Which are two of the biggest things you probably spend your money on.
Yeah.
Is like the gas for your car, electricity for your home, and all the food that you might eat. So
it's just so crazy that our GDP's got to be like the highest of any country.
Oh yeah.
In the world.
Oh, it's leaps
and
bounds.
I mean, if we just stopped spending so much money, we could turn that number and start making it go in a negative way.
Yeah. Well, and people are thinking like, oh, how are we ever going to pay this off? And we're not. We just have to default. We have to return back, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt bad. And you'll see things like 2008, but worse. And you might have a Great Depression again. But it's way better to have the truth in your economy than what this currently is, because it's going to hurt bad. But then once you're out of it and you recover, I mean, you still have a country, you still have a people, you still have people that want to work and are developing new technologies. So this might be the best time to do it, just in the sense that we're all not struggling to feed our families like the dirt farmers in the 30s did. We have some capital underneath us. We have the ability to find different sources of food and stuff like that. But it's just sad that it would have to come to some big cataclysmic thing, which you might not have the dollar anymore. You might have gold return, and you might have Bitcoin and all these other different types of competing currencies that might do better. We just don't know, and it's unable to be tried because of a centralized power system that doesn't allow us to at least experiment.
Yeah. You know what? Under our largest budget items, number 1, Medicaid and Medicare.
Medicare, Social Security.
1.1 trillion. Social Security, just below 1 trillion.
Yeah, and then the military is...
Then defense and war is 676 million.
Which, if you take the next 9 nations that have the highest spending, you add them all together, and we're still spending way more than them. Like, this was the idea under the whole neocon and conservative movement during the Soviet Union. This was like the Bill Buckleys, like we need to stop this big monstrosity government from taking us over, and in order to do that, we have to create a big monstrosity system of government to combat it. Yeah. And then once it's done, then we can dismantle it. But again, you give a group of people that much power and that much money. good luck. Good luck trying to tell Boeing and Lockheed Martin that that you're not going to purchase aircrafts from them to give to Saudi Arabia to starve 1 million children from food and water in Syria. Good luck. Telling these defense contractors that you're never going to use their services for 3 years, let's say. There'd be no way. It's the same thing with all the construction people that rely on government contracts to come in for roads. Most of these contractors would come belly up if they didn't get their bid in that got them the paycheck. They might have a smaller profit, but they'll get it if the roads are ever privatized. But the military contractors could sell small arms and other stuff to Americans to protect their homes or nation states or whatever comes up because of it. But it's not like it's one of those things where it's like, well, we're too used to drinking from this water hole, and hopefully it'll never run out. And that's just a stupid way of looking at it. It's like, why not look at other ones?
Go look for more water.
Yeah. So, well, I think that's it for this episode. I think we were just wanting to complain about the government shutdown in the sense that it's not a true one.
We went for a while on that one.
And next episode, we'll cover some kind of local news stories that might be interesting. Another potpourri episode, if you will. All right, everyone. As always, live radically and live free.
And shut it down.
Shut it all down.